let's start. Thank you for being here. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Esther de Lange. She is Vice President of the EPP group in the European Parliament, but at the same time, she is Vice President of the EPP party, and she is one of the key persons in the Dutch policy. She is the person responsible for all the economic issues in our group, but as well in our party. If we could be a government, she would be the Ministry of Economy. So for us, in our, I'm talking about Spain, in our very difficult situation, having her here is best thing we could do for this kind of university course. So I'm not going to say anything else, but remember that you will have in front of you one of the key women in the EPP group, so I'm saying in the European policy. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you very much, Esteban, and it's a pleasure to see all of you here today. When Esteban invited me to come here to Madrid, first of all, he didn't tell me it was going to be 42 degrees. But what he did tell me was to say, I'll show you El Escorial and I will show you where Philip II is buried. Of course, Philip II being, I think, King of Castile and Aragon, Naples, Sicily, Portugal, the Spanish Netherlands. I might have forgotten some bits, but that at the time would have made me, as a Catholic from the southern Netherlands, in a way Spanish. And of course, in a very indirect way, Philip II, and Esteban already honored his promise. Esteban is a man who honors his promises. We did visit the grave of Philip II, and in a way he played a role, of course, in the creation of my country, of the Dutch nation. Because, quite funny, our founding father is William of Orange. That doesn't sound any very Dutch at all, by the way, because Orange is in France. It was a part, kind of a region that his family was given at the time. William of Orange was German. He was from Dillenburg. I think it's in the constituency of Sven Simon, Esteban. And he was in Spanish service. So he was an advisor, effectively, to Philip II. But an advisor that turned against his master at a certain point and became a leading force in, let's call it, the resistance in the Netherlands to being ruled by a Spanish king, which as a result now has made sure that we in the Netherlands have the weirdest national anthem, if you look at it from a European perspective. So our national anthem, which is about William of Orange, because he's our founding father, it starts to say, the first line is, William of Orange, I am of German blood, which is a bit weird, since it's the Dutch national anthem. And then the second line is, I have always been loyal to the King of Spain. We're still talking about the Dutch national anthem. But in that second sentence lies the story. Because he says, I've always been loyal to the King of Spain, but now he has gone too far. And now we want to go at it alone as a Dutch nation. So that explains our funny national anthem and our, in a way, funny link that we have with Philip II. So I was very grateful, Esteban, that you gave me that opportunity to visit this very impressive place. But I'm now going to fast forward, of course, 450 years. I'm not going to be stuck with Philip II for a long, long time. Fast forward 450 years. And we don't need court intrigues anymore to shape our future. Although I'm not saying that there is not a level of court intrigue also in the European Parliament. We also no longer need the policy that the Habsburgians had, which was don't wage war, we don't wage war, we marry, which is true. They married all their daughters into all the royal houses of Europe, including yours. We don't need any of that, although, of course, since 1987, we have had more than 1 million Erasmus babies. So talk about, you know, in a way, the Habsburgian tradition. 450 years later, Erasmus, one of the key European projects that really we as a European Parliament keep defending, because it's very healthy, that you learn to look at your own country from another perspective. And that, I think, is what Erasmus does. We don't need any of that anymore. We have 27 member states voluntarily cooperating in the EU, which, if you see our history of wars, is a great thing. Is everything perfect then in the European Union? Far from it. Let me start by mentioning the, well, fact that maybe a lot of us, especially in the west of Europe, would not have thought possible 5 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, maybe even 1 year ago, which is, of course, the fact that we have a full-blown war again at the European continent, which is what we said we would never want to see again. Secondly, energy dependence, huge rises in cost of living. It will be the same in Spain. It is the same in the Netherlands. I was speaking to the Minister of Finance of one of our EPP parties in the Baltic states, 21% inflation there. We're struggling with 9% in the Netherlands. We're struggling with rising cost of living everywhere. And decisions, and this is, in a way, breaking a very fundamental promise that generations have always made to the next generation, namely the promise that you will be better off than your parents. If I look at my family, you know, even if I link it to European integration, for my grandparents, we were really born 5 kilometers away from the German border. So my grandparents, having gone through the Second World War, they knew they had to get along with their neighbors from Germany, even if that was hard after the war. So for them, Europe was peace. For the generation of my parents, Europe was prosperity, the brilliant German word Wirtschaftswunder, you know, the economic miracle. And then for my generation, I belong to that Erasmus generation. So the borders were open, possibilities were all over the place, and you could pretty much go wherever you would like. And that promise, you will always be better off, seems to maybe be broken, which is causing our societies to really start doubting some fundamental cornerstones that they are built upon. So I wanted to mention that because I think this is going on in many of our member states. And then decisions in the European Union take forever to be made. It's like an oil tanker that you need to shift in terms of its course. It takes forever. And finally, the political landscape, of course, is in turmoil in many of our member states. And then, of course, it is great to see the success of the Partido Popular that you had recently in Andalusia. It gives us hope. We all looked at you. I think the developments here in Spain, building from a position of strength in the opposition with a real, true, honest story, is something that we take a lot of inspiration from. The same with Donald Tusk in Poland, for example. He's doing a similar thing, and this is very hopeful. On the other hand, I come from a country where we currently have 20 political groups in our national parliament of 150 seats. So the fragmentation, which means that votes go to the extreme left, the extreme right, who pretend to be centrist, which is our natural place of the center-right. This is something that is going on in a lot of member states. I see François-Xavier Bellamy from France. Of course, happy National Day. It's 14 juillet. But you also hear a lot of stories about the Fifth Republic. You have a system whereby you elect a president who would then have immediately afterwards parliamentary elections to make sure that the president can do his job. No longer the case. We're seeing fragmentation, potential coalitions, and that discussion also in France. So your summer school, in short, comes at a very timely moment with all of this going on at the same time. With the EU elections just around the corner. 2024 is basically tomorrow. And therefore we as EPP, we as center-right, Christian Democrat and popular parties, we need to be extremely clear about the Europe that we want. And as EPP Vice President, I was in charge of preparing a document in that with that topic for our Congress in Rotterdam a month ago. And then you always say, okay, we will do this in 4 pages. They gave me 20. They gave me 20, which is understandable, but it's a pity. Because one of our challenges, I think, is to focus on the core and to focus on what is really important. And then everybody, of course, says European values, like freedom, like democracy, the rule of law, subsidiarity, that's what you hear. But everyone claims those. I mean, a liberal can tell you the same thing, a social democrat can tell you the same thing, a green can tell you the same thing. So if we don't make clear what we mean when we say European values, if we don't show how they are best off in our hands and not in other people's hands, then our chances diminish. We need to be translating these values in the actions that we take. So let me first of all make a remark about subsidiarity, which is, of course, for those of you who might study here or in other institutions, they will know that this is a fundamental element of Catholic social thought. But when I go out in the streets, nobody knows. So I will have to explain that it means different things at different times. Let me give you one example, healthcare. Healthcare is, according to the European treaties, a national competence. So it's member states that organize the way hospitals work, the way the insurance system works, how you get access to a doctor, etc. National. And then came COVID. And a call for stronger European cooperation in the area of health and actually making a European health union, which is something that the Spanish delegation leader in the European Parliament, of course, Dolores Montserrat, is working very hard in creating. That doesn't mean one system, identical in the Netherlands and in Spain, but it does mean more research. Because if we get the best and the brightest together, let's say in the area of cancer research, we will be quicker in finding cures there where we need them. It means production, and it means production in Europe. COVID showed us how dependent we were, even for the most simple painkiller. Had to come from India, had to come from China. And if it doesn't come anymore, within 2 weeks, it's no longer available in your pharmacy. So production as well, and protection of our citizens. And maybe, and this is at least my vision, in case of a pandemic, we need more shared competences between the EU and the national level to fight the health threat that is coming at us. I'm afraid COVID was not the last health threat, not the last pandemic. We need to be better prepared. Second topic I would like to touch upon is this European value of solidarity. And many of our competition, Isabel, you will know, we are fighting with the Social Democrats time and time again in the Economic Affairs Committee. And all they say is solidarity, and they claim that it is theirs. Competitiveness is something that they find harder to say. I don't know why, because the more competitive we are, I think the best we can organize our solidarity, but they claim to be the owners of solidarity. And of course, you need to help your neighbor in need. I think this is also a core Christian democratic value. But what our competitors tend to forget is that solidarity needs to go hand in hand with responsibility. And let me give you another example. The responsibility to reform and not only to spend and to consume. When I look at many national plans of the RRF, so the Resilience and Recovery Facility, the COVID emergency package that we created in Europe, that we created justifiably, I think it's good that we did that. However, we in the EPP, we've always said it should not be a blank check to a national government to do whatever they wish. It should be something that makes Europe stronger, and that is lacking in many of the plans that we see today. Speaking about solidarity, we will see the European Commission come up with a proposal next week, I think, to organize solidarity in case there's not enough gas in a number of member states. And I know I don't want to spoil the holiday mood, but this is a real scenario. And it would be unwise to go on holiday and then come back and then realize we need to start planning. We need to start planning now. But it remains organizing solidarity when the problem is already there. How do you make sure you have the reforms in place that hopefully next time you don't reach that point? I am very happy to talk to my neighboring country to provide gas to them if they're in need and we are less in need. But I tell you very honestly, my country will be less willing to talk to Germany if they turn off their nuclear power plants, which they are planning to do, and then ask the Netherlands for gas. So what I'm trying to say is if we have a stability and growth pact for our euro, for our currency, we have said, because your economic decisions in Spain has an impact on the other Eurozone countries, we sit together and we talk about economic policy. We need something like that in the field of energy. I need some kind of stability and growth pact that makes sure that member states lower their dependence on places like Russia. Some of our member states are 100% dependent on Russia for some forms of energy. I'd like governments to build interconnectors. It's good that France is here. Spain is here. Now we need a good interconnector between the two regions in the field of energy. So another example where solidarity is justified, but for us Christian Democrats, it goes hand in hand with responsibility. And then my final kind of core concept that we need to translate in our actions is the issue of stewardship. Difficult English word, very old-fashioned English word, maybe in a way. Nowadays, it's much more hip and trendy to call it sustainability. Even worse, to call it green, which is a free commercial for one political party. I like the word stewardship, not only because it doesn't give free publicity to the Greens, but because it's a broader concept. And I think it's a concept that we as center-right are much more comfortable with. Yes, it means that you need to leave the planet in such a shape that the next generations can also still live there and can live there in a responsible and in a comfortable way. But it's broader. And let me give you one example again from Esteban and and Pablo and all the others' real life in the European Parliament. This so-called Green Deal, there you have the word green already, making me a bit, that says that Europe should produce 55% less CO2 in 2030 and should be climate neutral in 2050. Commission translated that into a whole big package of laws called Fit for 55. I don't know what it's like in Spain. In the Netherlands, to my friends, if I say Fit for 55, they think it's a program on television for gym, for old people. We have that, 9 o'clock in the morning to 9:15. It's for old people, so they do easy things like raise your hand and walk step by step. Fit for 55 sounds like that, right? It doesn't sound like the most ambitious climate package, but it is. And we supported it as EPP. But what happened in the Parliament in reality, when we made the first climate law, that is kind of the introduction to this big climate package, there was some kind of a Eurovision song contest going on. So there was the target, 55% less CO2 in 2030. Which is around the corner. You've been speaking to businesses yesterday. I think you've heard how big the challenge is. What happened in the European Parliament is that you had some kind of Eurovision. So our colleagues from the left, the Greens, the Liberals, they were shouting 55. No, we want 60. We want 65, you know, not 10 points, 12 points, 14 points. It was like Eurovision, 70%, 75%. So it was a shouting competition, who could be the greenest to the outside world. And then came reality. And you had several groups of members of the European Parliament, some who were shocked what it would mean if we really did their 75% that they voted for. If we translated that into real legislation, how hard we would be punishing our economy. And you had a group, even worse, that said, we want these highest ambitions, we still want them, but we take away all the instruments you can think of that will make you able to get there. And this is the biggest fight we are fighting as EPP. So we have groups that say we want these high ambitions, but we want no nuclear. Never. Nowhere in Europe, even if the member state, like France, decides that they want to have nuclear. They say we don't want biofuels. Because that's also not good. If you burn wood, even if it's wood that is recovered, that is lost, otherwise no biofuels. They want hydrogen, but they want hydrogen to be green immediately, which is not possible. You have to start with what you have now, which might be normal gas, going towards hydrogen based on renewables. So if you don't make the intermediary step, the hydrogen agenda in Europe is lost. And even worse, they are not willing to invest in infrastructure. I've been talking about these interconnectors, no priority for them. So this is the biggest fight we're fighting. Sometimes I think that these groups would be happy if industry leaves Europe, because industry is dirty. On the other hand, industry provides our jobs. That doesn't mean I want them to be emitting as much as they do now. I want them to be ambitious, but I want them to stay. We need jobs in Europe, not in China, for this green transition to actually work. And this is something I've learned. I just learned that Philips II was only 1.58 meters, Esteban. And that's 2 centimeters smaller than me, which is great, because in the Netherlands, I'm always the shortest person in the room. You know Dutch people, right? Dutch people, the men are 2 meters, the women are 180, so, and my last name, it means tall. So I have the worst name for a politician. I'm introduced, I'm called tall, I come into the room, the first thing I have to do is lower the microphone by 20 centimeters, effectively. But we also have a saying in Dutch, and that is, if you're not the tallest, if you're not the biggest, you have to be the strongest, you have to be the smartest. And I really think that this is the challenge that Europe is up to at the moment as well. We're no longer the biggest continent in terms of population. We're also not the youngest continent in terms of population. So we have to be the smartest. And if our industry can be the smartest, which is the most innovative, the most competitive, the smart boys and girls that actually invent this green solution and then can market it even all over the world and for sure apply it in Europe first, then we stand a chance. So, and let's, 2 more things. One thing about stewardship. So, as you notice, it means that my vision, my idea of stewardship is not only environmental. It is also empowering. It is giving power to business, giving power to people to be green and to create the instruments that we need. And finally, for me, stewardship is financial. My son is 11. If we take decisions now, that might mean that we're very green in a couple of years, but that leave him with a debt that he and his generation can never pay off. There's less and less of them, less and less young people in Europe. So for me, within this concept of stewardship, we also have to think about the financial stewardship and what you do to the next generation if you burden them with an unsustainable debt. And this is something that is not north-south. This is not Germans against Spanish. This is not West against East, because Esteban, a couple of years ago, we wrote a piece together on this issue and we agreed This is responsible, center-right, against those groups who are not even thinking about the concept. And we need to make sure our people, our voters, know. So let me finish then, dear friends, to say that I've given you some elements about the Europe that I would want. It is for sure the smartest, maybe not the biggest, but hey, that you can change. It is agile, it can adapt to new circumstances. It is responsible, and again, it thrives on competition, research, and being innovative. This is mine, but the question is, what is yours? And that is what the discussion should be about. And then we should not only know what kind of Europe we want, but we should most of all want it. And we should want it with passion. The passion that is sometimes lacking in the European discussion at the moment. Jacques Delors already said, you don't fall in love with a market. We're too much a market. We're too much in administration. Where's the passion? Where's the vision? Where is what you want? I would like you as young people to have that discussion. On Twitter this morning, I saw an even starker warning than the one of Jacques Delors. I read, the failure of imagination is arguably the greatest threat to our democracy. And I think there, for once, Twitter was very, very right. So let's imagine the Europe that we want. I hope you will. Let's imagine it, let's want it, and then let's build it. I think the Partido Popular, the EPP, are ready to do so. Thank you very much, and the best of luck. I don't know if there's time for questions, but if people would like to raise questions, please feel free to do so. My assistant will drag me off the stage if there's no time left. So.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Carlos Grisano, the Secretary General of the Youth of Partido Popular. And we just had a panel before you about foreign policy, and I wanted to ask you, since I think foreign policy can be the spearhead of this passion when it comes to bringing Europe closer together and to bridge the gap, I wanted to ask you about a possible solution that has been discussed many times. Since we have a Eurozone, why not having also a defense zone for Europe, bringing first the most important and relevant countries in our European Union together to cooperate and have the same military capacities and have the same technologies. What do you think about this possible solution? Would the Europe of creating this Europe of defense or this defense Eurozone be a solution? And could this also help with all the difficulties that we face when we have to explain all the benefits of Europe to our citizens?
It's a question with a question within a question, kind of. I will try to answer it as good as possible. And in the book I wrote about Europe, I already wrote that we should stop buying American material if there were European equivalents available. That was a very unpopular thought. François Xavier is clapping. In France, it's a very popular thought, but in the Netherlands, it was a very unpopular thought. We're very Atlanticist. I want us to remain Atlanticist. I think what we do within the EU should always be embedded in NATO. I mean, let's be very, very honest. The reason that Putin is at some point hesitating whether he goes further in Ukraine or not, it's not because of the EU, it's because of NATO. So EU defense and NATO should be going hand in hand. But we can do more. We can do much more than we do now. I'm a bit careful of saying, should we put together the most relevant countries first? For two reasons. One is, you have to make sure that this doesn't become big countries against small countries, big industries against small industries, which is why in the creation of the European Defence Fund, which we have to stimulate the European defence industry, I made sure that small and medium enterprises that might not be the huge French ones or the huge Italian ones, but if you have a European project that is also including a smaller partner, that you would then get more funding from this fund. I think that's important to make sure that all the member states, we have some very specialist defense producers, but they're nothing compared to the ones that François Xavier has, you know. So how do you make sure that they operate hand in hand? I think that's very important. And the second thing you need to be careful about, and any military man or woman will tell you, we have one of them in our presidency in the EPP group, Arnaud Danjean, and he will also tell you that military cooperation starts bottom up. So yes, we have a lot of experience cooperating with the Dutch, with the Germans. The airspace of the Netherlands is jointly defended by Belgium. So 1 week it's the Belgians' turn, or 1 month, and the other month we do also their airspace. So that goes very, very far. But it was created from, and the same for the Marine, for the Navy. We actually buy ships together. So we needed 2 types of ships, and we did only 2 tenders. So the Belgians did it for 1 type of ship, and we did it for the other type of ship, which is then divided over the countries. Goes very, very far, so I have some ideas, I think, that we can build upon. But you cannot force a military man to top-down suddenly go into battle with a unit or a colleague from a country that he's never cooperated with. So you need to start building this, like the examples I gave, from bottom up, and then yes, there's a lot to gain. So I'm with you there.
Esther, thank you very much for your incredible lecture. We have among us some friends coming from South America. And I would like to
My
ask...
favorite continent. I felt very welcome last time I was there.
Yeah. And I want to...
I will tell you why.
We have the feeling, I'm talking about the Spaniards now, that with this conflict in Ukraine, we are forgetting the rest of the world, and especially we are forgetting South America. Yeah. Can you say a few words about the treaties, the trade treaties, that we have forget at all about them? We have forget everything about them, and especially about Mercosur. Do you think that, do we have any kind of future with that trade agreement, Mercosur? Yeah.
Well, in any case, we will have to. It is part of the strategy of not being the biggest, but being the smartest. So the smartest cannot allow to only focus on one problem, even though the problem is huge. Don't get me wrong. One of my former assistants is married to a Ukrainian lady. I get on a weekly basis the stories from her relatives on the ground. Her grandmother lives 1 village away from Bucha. She has seen what happens on the ground, and it's horrific. But it doesn't mean that we should turn a blind eye to what is happening in other parts of the world. South America, yes. What about India? India at the moment, the way India is behaving towards Russia, buying all the oil and gas cheaply. Should we be in? Ursula von der Leyen was there immediately. She has to, if she wants to be a geopolitical commission. But we should also keep having this outlook. We went to Mexico. We went to Mexico to talk about trade. Trade and the elements that come with it. I think that is important for Europe. If you see the level of impunity in Mexico, students disappearing, journalists disappearing, no perpetrator ever found, then trade is sometimes also a door to discuss these societal issues. But one big reservation there, sometimes we Europeans, we get too arrogant. This same Ukrainian lady, we invited her because she's a professor of European foreign policy in Amsterdam. And we invited her to one of our conferences of the Dutch Christian Democrats. And the panel was all Dutch and this Ukrainian lady. And we were talking about foreign policy, and I thought she would be, you should be more powerful and more principled and all of that, her being Ukrainian. And she said, you Europeans, you're sometimes so arrogant, so much talk, and then you don't have the instruments to actually implement it. We now talk to Africa about energy. We don't talk with Africa about a common energy agenda enough. So all of these things we should do. The reason I said I felt very welcome in South America was, of course, the last time, Esteban, we were invited to go to Venezuela. And we were not let into the country by Maduro. And I think I was one of the few non-Spanish on that flight in your team to accompany you, and I thought it was very important to do. And this is our responsibility as members of the European Parliament. We need to understand issues in other member states that our friends in other member states give priority to, and we should make clear that they're also understood in a country like the Netherlands. So I know it would be great if you could continue to work on South America as our alarm clock, so to say, to make sure that we don't close our eyes to what is happening there. But then it is up to all of us, in particular the non-Spanish, to make sure that we all address the issue and we don't make it a Spain-South America thing. It should be an EPP thing. That is what we should work towards. And next time, damn it, I want to be let into the country. So let's see what we can do together, Esteban. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Karen. I come from Ecuador. I was wondering, so we've been talking about identity and what it means to be European. And I do wonder how immigration, not only coming from Latin America, but from all over around Europe, puts in danger what is to be a European. Do you think immigration represents an obstacle to bringing a definition to what a European is, or do you think it should be looked as an opportunity to build? Yeah, that would be. Very
good question, and also an issue that Europe, I think, has been struggling with itself, also because of, I'm not talking about the refugees now coming from Ukraine, but the immigration waves that we've seen before that, so 2015, Middle East, were very much situations where Europe was not in control. And where the European countries were also played against each other. And then migration, for various reasons, becomes a thing that is looked upon negatively because you're not in control. But at the same time, you need to notice that those member states who at the time were most resistant to do anything at all for refugees from the Middle East are now the ones that are welcoming with the widest open arms numbers that we in Spain and in the Netherlands would find mind-blowing coming from Ukraine. Poland is on its way to 4 million refugees coming from Ukraine. In the Netherlands, we're struggling to house 60,000. So 4 million is huge. Let's not forget Moldova. Tiny, tiny country, not a member of the EU yet, but relative to its population, taking most people from Ukraine. Which leads me to the conclusion that Europe is not an anti-immigration continent, but that the discussion is about having actually a migration policy. Let's be honest, also talk about integration. Speaking languages, how do we facilitate that? Of course, being from Central or South America, in Spain that will be easy peasy, but it's not that easy for everyone linguistically. So if we broaden it and if we make sure that the system is not full of people that should not be in the system. In my book I wrote, sometimes you need to be hard to defend soft values. What are these soft values? Soft values for me as a Christian Democrat are that if somebody is fleeing war, I'm protecting that person. No matter if that is number 1, number 10, number 10,000, or number 100,000. That person is fleeing war, and I'm protecting them. So I'm against quota. There was always a discussion on quota. I'm against quota because imagine if you are number 50,001 and you are really fleeing Assad And we say, sorry, you're just one too many. For me, as a Christian Democrat, that goes against my entire value base. But the hard part of defending that soft value is that you say there are many in the system that shouldn't be there. Most of the people in the system coming from Morocco into the European Union will not be entitled to refugee status. They stay in the system very long, and they are the reason that populists will say number 50,001 is no longer allowed in, even if that person is a real refugee. So I think it's our responsibility not to be the populist, not to say immigration is the problem, not to be turning the blind eye. Everyone coming can be staying. Sorry, no. But we have rules and value systems in case of Christian Democrats about who can stay and who we do want to protect. And that is the migration policy that I defend. And also I think the talk that we should have and that we're not having enough in Europe, which helps the populist or which helps the extreme left. The door is always open, and the extreme right, the door is always closed. The only real answer, I think, is ours, and we need to be much more vocal about it. Thank you for your good question, by the way. And sorry for the long answer, but that's always what you get when you touch upon, you know, big, broad issues. Well, if there's no more questions, then let me tell you that it was a pleasure, dear colleagues, to be here. You know, all these guys from the Partido Popular in the European Parliament and women, tough women, by the way, that I normally see in the European Parliament doing their day job, it is very, very good to see them kind of preparing the younger generation of the party in Spain, but also for us as an EPP in Europe. Makes me, as a result, I go back home feeling a bit older than I felt this morning, but at least filled with a lot of hope if I see the energy among the audience here. So thank you very much.